When did your kid get kicked out of Chuck E. Cheese? My 8-year-old daughter Avery got permanently banned from every Chuck E. Cheese in the state after causing $35,000 in damages during a birthday party. The manager's voice was shaking when he called me. Ma'am, you need to get here immediately. Your daughter has destroyed multiple animatronics and assaulted our employee. We're considering pressing charges. I could hear chaos in the background. Kids crying, alarms going off, someone yelling about calling 911. She's completely out of control. The manager shouted over the noise. If you're not here in 20 minutes, we're having her arrested. I dropped my shift at the hospital and raced across town, my mind spinning. Avery had begged to go to her classmate's party. As a single mom working 2 jobs, I rarely got to take her places like this. She'd been so excited, wore her favorite dress, practiced her happy birthday singing all week. When I arrived, 3 police officers were in the parking lot. One had his hand on his taser. That's the mother, someone pointed at me. Inside, it looked like a tornado had hit. The animatronic band was in pieces. Pasquale's head was disconnected, wires sparking from his neck. Helen Henny's guitar smashed through her chest cavity. Mystery Munch's keyboard keys scattered across the floor like broken teeth. The ticket blaster machine had been completely dismantled, its motor still smoking, tickets everywhere like confetti at a crime scene. In the middle of it all sat Avery, holding what looked like a piece of Chuck E.'s tail, her favorite dress torn at the shoulder, her hands bleeding from pulling apart machinery. The manager, Mr. Davidson, was pacing frantically, his face purple with rage. Your daughter is disturbed. She attacked our performer. She could have killed someone. Look at this place. This is tens of thousands in damages. A teenage employee in a ripped Chuck E. costume was sitting in the corner, holding ice to his face, his nose clearly broken. Parents were gathering their children, shooting me disgusted looks. I recognized several from school, the ones who drove Teslas and hired tutors for their kindergartners. Mrs. Wellington was already on her phone with her lawyer husband. Avery, what happened? I knelt beside her, noticing her knuckles were raw. I fixed something broken, Mom. The birthday boy's mother, Mrs. Sandlin, stepped forward, designer purse clutched like a weapon. Your daughter ruined my son's $2,000 party. She went psychotic, started destroying everything during the birthday show. We have it on video. Avery, tell me exactly what happened. She looked up at me with steady eyes. No remorse, no fear. Mom, they made certain kids work for their tokens. Mr. Davidson interrupted. We have a merit system. Kids can earn extra tokens through helping out, but only the kids whose parents didn't buy the platinum package had to work. Avery continued, her voice eerily calm. The ones who couldn't afford the $500 party upgrade. My stomach tightened. What kind of work? Jaden had to clean all the tables while other kids played. Maria had to pick up trash from under the games. Brett swept pizza off the floor for 2 hours during a birthday party. Mrs. Sandlin shifted uncomfortably. It teaches responsibility. They made us serve pizza to the platinum kids. Avery's voice got stronger. Carry their prizes. Get their refills. Clean up their spilled drinks on our hands and knees. While they played, we worked. Then they said if we did good enough, we'd get tokens at the end. The police officer started taking notes, his expression changing. Brett's mom is deployed in Syria. His grandma could only afford the basic party. He cleaned bathrooms. At Chuck E. Cheese. He's 7. They made him clean pee off the floor. Other parents were looking away now. Someone whispered about leaving. After 2 hours of labor, they gave us each 5 tokens. 5. The platinum kids got unlimited cards worth hundreds. Then during the birthday show, they made us stand in the back and hold everyone's prizes while they got to dance with Chuck E. The teenage employee in the Chuck E. costume spoke up weakly, blood still dripping from his nose. The parents told me to only interact with the premium kids. Said it was part of their package. They paid extra for exclusive character time. So when Chuck E. came out, Avery continued, tears now streaming but voice steady, and he walked right past Brett even though it was Brett's first time here ever. Even though Brett had been cleaning toilets and vomit for 2 hours, even though Brett waved and called out Chuck E. It's my first time. I lost it. The animatronics? I asked. They announced that the band show was only for platinum kids. Basic package kids had to go to the back storage room during the show. Brett started crying. He just wanted to see the robots sing, after cleaning their toilets. So I unplugged everything. Then I took it apart piece by piece. If Brett couldn't enjoy the show after cleaning their bathrooms, nobody should. I stared at him, then back at Mrs. Sandlin. I know someone who could help you. The name I said next made her drop to her knees. Mrs. Sandlin's knees hit the sticky floor between scattered ticket stubs and someone's abandoned pizza slice. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and started typing frantically, probably messaging her lawyer husband or Googling Ayana's name to confirm what I just threatened her with. 2 other parents near the prize counter went pale and started whispering to each other. Their designer bags suddenly clutched tighter like shields. Mr. Davidson stopped pacing and stared at me, his purple face going a shade lighter as he processed what Ayana Kruger's involvement would mean for his franchise. The police officers finished their conversation by their cruisers, and one of them, the older one who'd been taking notes, walked toward me with a different expression than before. His hand wasn't near his taser anymore. He stopped a few feet away and pulled out a business card, holding it out to me with fingers that weren't tense like they'd been 20 minutes ago, when he thought my daughter was just some out-of-control kid destroying property for no reason. He asked if I could bring Avery to the station tomorrow afternoon for a formal statement, explaining they needed to document everything she witnessed properly before deciding what charges, if any, made sense here. His voice was measured now, almost careful, like he was actually thinking about the child labor angle, instead of just seeing broken robots and an injured employee. I took the card and nodded, my throat too tight to trust my voice. Mr. Davidson started to protest, but the officer held up one hand without even looking at him, keeping his attention on me. The other two officers were talking to the teenage employee now, the one whose nose Avery broke, and I could see them writing things down in small notebooks. Parents were gathering their kids and leaving quickly, shooting looks at each other that ranged from uncomfortable to outright ashamed. Mrs. Wellington had disappeared entirely, probably to her car to call her lawyer husband with an update about this disaster. I turned to gather Avery's things, her little backpack with the unicorn patch she'd sewn on herself, and the officer handed me paperwork to sign promising we'd appear tomorrow at 2. My hands shook so hard I could barely write our address legibly, the pen skipping across the form and making my signature look like a child wrote it. Across the destroyed restaurant, the teenage employee was helped to his feet by a different manager, still holding melting ice to his face, blood dried on his ripped Chuck E. costume. His eyes met mine for just a second, and I felt sick. Actually sick, knowing my 8-year-old daughter broke this kid's nose even if her reasons made sense to her brain that couldn't fully understand consequences yet. He looked maybe 17, probably saving for college or helping his family with bills, and now he was hurt and traumatized, and I didn't know how to make that right. Avery stood beside me holding that piece of Chucky's tail like it was evidence she needed to keep, her favorite dress torn and dirty, her hands wrapped in paper towels someone had given her that were spotted with blood. I finished the paperwork and handed it back, and the officer nodded and said we were free to go, but to make sure we showed up tomorrow or there would be a warrant. I promised we would and took Avery's hand, leading her through the wreckage toward the exit. Parents moved out of our way like we were contagious, pulling their kids closer as we passed. In the car, Avery climbed into her booster seat without being asked and buckled herself in, something she usually made me help with even though she could do it herself. She sat staring at her scraped knuckles, turning her hands over slowly like she was seeing them for the first time. I started the engine but couldn't make myself put it in drive yet. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like I was either telling her what she did was okay, because those kids were being treated unfairly, or punishing her for standing up for someone who needed help. Both felt wrong. We sat in silence, the engine running, the parking lot slowly emptying around us as families escaped this nightmare party. After maybe 10 minutes of this horrible quiet, I noticed the cuts on her hands were still bleeding a little through the paper towels, and I remembered I was a mom before I was anything else, and moms take care of injuries first, and figure out the moral lessons later. I put the car in drive and headed toward the urgent care clinic 3 blocks from our apartment, the one that took our insurance and stayed open until 9. Avery didn't ask where we were going. She just kept staring at her hands. The urgent care waiting room was nearly empty on a Saturday evening, just us and an older man holding his wrist at a weird angle. The intake nurse took one look at Avery's hands and moved us straight back to a room. The doctor who came in was maybe 40, with kind eyes and gentle hands that made Avery relax a tiny bit. She pulled on gloves and started cleaning the cuts carefully, asking in a soft voice how this happened. I explained simply that there was an incident at a birthday party. My daughter pulled apart some machinery and we needed the wounds cleaned and documented. The doctor nodded like she heard Stranger Things every shift and didn't judge, just focused on removing bits of wire and metal from Avery's scraped palms. She photographed each injury with a medical camera for our records, noting the locations and depth of cuts in her chart. Avery winced but didn't cry, just watched the doctor work with that same steady expression she'd had sitting in the destroyed restaurant. The doctor applied antibiotic ointment and wrapped both hands in clean white bandages, then gave me care instructions and a prescription for stronger ointment if the cuts showed any signs of infection. She told Avery she was very brave and handed her a sticker, which Avery took with her bandaged hand and stuck to her torn dress without smiling. Back in the car, the sun was setting and turning the sky orange and pink, and Avery finally spoke for the first time since we left Chuck E. Cheese. She said Brett was crying when they told him he couldn't watch the robot show after he spent 2 hours cleaning their bathrooms, and that's when something broke inside her. Her voice cracked on the word crying, and I glanced in the rearview mirror to see tears running down her face now. Not the angry, determined tears from before, but sad, guilty ones. She described how Brett had been so excited because his grandma saved up for months to afford even the basic party package, how he'd told Avery it was his first time ever at Chuck E. Cheese and he couldn't wait to see the singing robots. She said when Chuck E. walked right past him during the character time, and Brett waved and called out and got ignored because he was a basic package kid, she felt something snap in her chest like a rubber band pulled too tight. Then when they announced the show was only for premium kids and Brett had to go to the storage room after cleaning toilets for 2 hours, she said she stopped thinking and just started breaking things. She said she knew it was wrong to hurt that teenager and she felt terrible about his nose, but in that moment all she could think about was making it so nobody got to enjoy anything if Brett couldn't enjoy it after working so hard. At home, I made us grilled cheese sandwiches even though neither of us was really hungry, just because it was dinner time and moms make dinner. I sat across from her at our small kitchen table, the one that wobbled, because one leg was shorter than the others, and tried to figure out how to be both a mom who teaches consequences and a mom who doesn't crush her daughter's sense of right and wrong. The sandwiches sat getting cold between us while I searched for words that felt true. Finally, I told her that what those kids experienced was unfair and wrong, that making children work during a party because their parents couldn't afford the expensive package was terrible, but destroying property and hurting someone can't be how we fix unfair things. I said I understood why she got so angry, that seeing a friend treated badly would make anyone upset, but we have to find other ways to help that don't involve violence or breaking things. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Avery nodded slowly, picking at the crust of her sandwich with her bandaged fingers. She asked if Brett was going to be okay, if his grandma was going to be mad at her for ruining the party, and I realized she'd been worried about the other kids this whole time, not about herself or the trouble she was in. She wanted to know if Maria and Jaden were upset, if the birthday boy was sad, if anyone blamed Brett for what happened. I promised we'd find out how Brett and the others were doing, that we'd call his grandma tomorrow and check on him. I said we'd figure out together how to make things right in a way that didn't involve smashing robots, that there were better ways to fight unfairness that actually helped instead of just creating more damage. She asked what those ways were, and I admitted I didn't know yet, but we'd learn together. She finally took a small bite of her sandwich. That night, I lay awake in my bed doing math in my head, the kind of math that makes your chest tight and your breathing shallow. $35,000 in damages. My savings account with $1,200 that was supposed to be for emergencies, which I guess this qualified as. My credit card's already carrying balances from last winter when my car needed a new transmission, and I had to choose between fixing it or missing work. The hospital paid decent for a single mom, $42,000 a year plus benefits, but not enough for this kind of disaster. My weekend shifts at the clinic barely covered our extras, the things like Avery's art class and new shoes when she grew out of the old ones and the occasional movie night with popcorn. I tried to figure out payment plans in my head, how much per month I could maybe afford, but even $200 monthly would take years, and we'd have to cut everything that wasn't absolutely necessary. No more art class, no more eating out ever, no new clothes unless something wore through. I stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of it pressing down. $35,000 for robots my daughter destroyed because she couldn't stand watching a 7-year-old clean bathrooms. The next morning, I called Brett's grandmother using the number from the party invitation list that Mrs. Sandlin had shared in the school parent chat weeks ago, back when this was just going to be a normal birthday party. She answered on the third ring with a cautious hello, her voice older and tired. I explained who I was, that I was Avery's mom, and asked if we could talk about what happened at the party yesterday. There was a long pause where I could hear her breathing, and I braced myself for anger or blame, or her hanging up on me. Instead, she said yes. She wanted to talk, her voice careful but not hostile. I explained that Avery told me what happened at the party, and I needed to understand if it was true, if kids really were made to work like that. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her breathing change, getting faster. Then she started talking, and everything spilled out. She confirmed the bathroom cleaning, the tables, the trash pickup, all of it exactly like Avery described. Her voice shook when she said Brett had been so excited for weeks, his first time at a place like that, and she'd saved money from her grocery budget to afford even the basic package. She told me she complained to a manager during the party when she saw Brett on his hands and knees wiping up spilled soda, while other kids played games. The manager said it was standard policy for basic package guests to participate in venue maintenance, said it taught responsibility and work ethic. She asked if the other kids were also participating, and the manager walked away. She watched Brett carry pizza to kids at the premium tables, watched him sweep up dropped food, watched him disappear into the bathroom with cleaning supplies. When she tried to pull him out to play, a staff member told her he needed to finish his tasks first, or he wouldn't get his tokens. I felt sick listening to this. I asked if she'd be willing to write down what happened, maybe talk to the police if they needed more information about the party setup. The line went quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Then she said yes, her voice stronger now. She said Brett came home and cried himself to sleep, not because of the destroyed robots or the chaos, but because he felt ashamed that he wasn't good enough for the robot show. He asked her if they were poor, if that's why he had to clean while other kids played. That broke something in my chest, hearing about a 7-year-old internalizing that kind of shame. I thanked her and promised to keep her updated, then sat staring at my phone trying to process that this wasn't just Avery's version. This actually happened. I opened my laptop and searched for Ayanna Kruger's law office, found the number on her firm's website. My hands shook dialing and I got voicemail, which I half expected. I left a message explaining who I was, what happened at the party, the child labor situation with the packages, the $35,000 in damages they were threatening me with. My voice sounded steadier on the recording than I felt, like I was reading a script instead of describing my actual life falling apart. I said I wasn't sure if this was something she could help with, but I'd heard she handled cases like this, and I hung up not expecting a callback, but hoping maybe her name alone would make corporate think twice. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of trying to keep busy while my brain spun in circles. At noon, my phone rang with the Chuck E. Cheese number and my stomach dropped. Mr. Davidson's voice came through tight and angry, demanding I come to the restaurant immediately to discuss payment arrangements. He said he'd already contacted their insurance company, and they needed my insurance information, my employment details, my bank account numbers. He said if I didn't come in by end of business today, he was filing a civil lawsuit. I interrupted him and said I'd speak to him through my lawyer. He started to respond, but I hung up before he could finish, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't have a lawyer. I had $1,200 in savings and credit card debt, and a daughter who destroyed $35,000 worth of equipment. I sat on my couch staring at nothing until my phone buzzed with the school parent chat notification. I opened it and watched the messages flood in. Someone had recorded video of the aftermath at Chuck E. Cheese and was sharing it in the chat. I clicked the link and watched shaky footage of the destroyed animatronics, the scattered tickets, Avery sitting in the middle holding that piece of robot tail. Her face wasn't clearly visible, but everyone knew it was her. Mrs. Ed Wellington posted a long message about disturbed children and appropriate consequences, and the need to protect other students from violent behavior. Other parents piled on agreeing, saying their kids were traumatized, saying Avery should be expelled or at least suspended. A few parents posted thinking face emojis without comment. I felt my face get hot reading it, felt the judgment pouring through the screen. I didn't respond, but I started screenshotting everything, some instinct telling me to document this. I captured Mrs. De Wellington's post, the video link, the agreement comments, all of it. I watched these parents circle their wagons to protect the premium package system that let them treat other people's kids like servants. 3 parents sent me private messages. One said she was sorry this happened and people were being harsh. Another said her son had to clean during a party last month and she'd been too embarrassed to say anything. The third just sent a heart emoji. Small gestures, but they made me feel slightly less alone. My supervisor from the hospital called in the afternoon asking if I needed time off. She said she'd heard through the grapevine about some incident involving Avery and wanted to check on me. I almost cried at the kindness in her voice, the lack of judgment. I explained I needed to keep my shifts but might need flexibility for meetings this week. She agreed without hesitation, said to let her know what I needed, and she'd work it out with scheduling. The next day, Avery and I went to the police station for the interview. I'd been dreading it, imagining harsh questions and accusations, but the officer who took notes at the scene was gentle with her. He asked her to describe what she saw and why she reacted the way she did. Avery explained about Brett and the bathrooms, about the premium kids getting everything while the basic kids worked. She described her anger building as she watched, the moment she snapped when they sent Brett to the storage room. The officer wrote everything down carefully, nodding sometimes, asking clarifying questions. When Avery finished, he explained that because of her age and the circumstances, they were recommending juvenile diversion instead of formal charges. I felt my shoulders drop with relief I didn't know I'd been holding. He said diversion meant Avery would work with a counselor and do community service, and possibly pay some money back, but she wouldn't have a criminal record if she completed the program successfully. He said the program usually worked well for kids who made a bad choice but weren't actually dangerous. It was the first real hope I'd felt since this started. That afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Ayanna Kruger's voice came through, professional but warm, saying she got my message. I nearly dropped my phone in surprise. She asked detailed questions about the party setup, what tasks kids were assigned, how long they worked, whether parents knew beforehand that basic package meant child labor. I could hear her typing notes as I talked, the clicking of her keyboard punctuating my answers. She asked about Brett specifically, about the bathrooms, about his age, about what he was promised in exchange for the work. She asked if other parents saw this happening, if anyone took photos or videos before Avery's outburst. I told her everything I knew, everything Brett's grandmother had confirmed, everything Avery had described. Her voice changed when I got to the part about Brett and the bathrooms, getting sharper and more focused. She asked me to repeat exactly what tasks the kids did, and for how long and what they got paid. And I realized she wasn't just listening anymore. She was building a case in her head. She explained that what Chuck E. Cheese did might actually break child labor laws because the kids weren't employees, but they were still required to work for payment, which in this case was the tokens. The fact that only kids whose parents couldn't afford the expensive package had to work made it worse, possibly discriminatory based on economic status. She said making a 7-year-old clean bathrooms in a commercial building for 2 hours in exchange for 5 tokens that were worth maybe 50 cents was exploitation no matter how they tried to dress it up as a merit system. I could hear her typing fast while she talked, the clicking getting more intense when I described Brett on his hands and knees cleaning pee off the floor while the premium kids played games 10 feet away. She asked if anyone took photos or videos before Avery's outburst, and I told her about the parent chat and how Mrs. Sandlin mentioned having video of the destruction, but probably not of the work assignments. Ayanna said that was okay because she had my statement and Brett's grandmother's confirmation and the other parents who messaged me, plus the teenage employee who admitted the parents told him to exclude basic package kids. Then she explained something that made my stomach drop. She couldn't represent me directly because her firm handled class action cases against corporations, not individual criminal defense for kids who destroyed property. But she could make some calls to Chuck E. Cheese corporate and let them know someone was looking into their labor practices, and maybe the threat of a bigger investigation would make them more reasonable about the damages they were demanding from me. She told me very clearly not to sign anything or agree to any payment plans until she got back to me, and not to talk to Mr. Davidson or any corporate representatives without her knowing about it first. I promised I wouldn't, and thanked her about 6 times before hanging up, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. The next 2 days felt like living in some weird alternate reality where I had to pretend everything was normal, while my whole life was potentially falling apart. I went to my hospital shifts and smiled at patients and checked vitals and updated charts like I wasn't terrified of getting sued for $35,000 I didn't have. My coworkers could tell something was wrong, but I just said it was family stuff and they left me alone, which I appreciated more than they knew. At home, I kept checking my phone every 5 minutes, waiting for Ayanna to call back or for Mr. Davidson to show up at my door with a lawsuit, but nothing happened. The silence was almost worse than bad news because my brain kept filling it with worst-case scenarios. The school parent chat kept going, though, getting worse each day. Mrs. Wellington posted about the importance of addressing behavioral issues early before they escalate, with about 15 replies agreeing that some children clearly needed professional intervention. Another mom shared an article about childhood aggression and future criminal behavior. No names mentioned, but everyone knew who she meant. Someone else started a thread about whether the school should implement stricter screening for students with violent tendencies. I read every message and screenshot everything, my anger building with each passive-aggressive post, but I didn't respond because what could I say that wouldn't make it worse? Avery went to the school each morning quiet and tense and came home the same way. On Wednesday, she told me that 3 girls who used to play with her at recess now wouldn't because their mom said she was violent and they should stay away. On Thursday, she said a boy in her class asked her if she was going to destroy the school next. She said it like she was reporting the weather, flat and emotionless, but I saw her hands clenched tight in her lap. Thursday afternoon, I was waiting at pickup, standing apart from the other parents like usual, when Mrs. Wellington walked directly toward me with her face arranged in what was probably supposed to look like concern, but came across as smug satisfaction. She asked in this syrupy voice if we had gotten Avery the help she clearly needed, emphasizing the word clearly like she was a doctor making a diagnosis. She said she knew a wonderful psychiatrist who worked with troubled children and had excellent success rates with behavioral modification, and she'd be happy to share his contact information. She put her hand on my arm like we were friends having a caring conversation, and I had to focus on not jerking away. I thanked her politely and said we were handling it, and she smiled and said she just wanted to make sure because Avery's issues were affecting other children now, and that wasn't fair to them. She said it so sweetly, like she was doing me a favor by pointing out how my daughter was damaging her precious angels. I felt my nails digging into my palms hard enough to leave marks, and I knew I needed to walk away before I said something I'd regret, so I thanked her again and turned toward the school entrance. She called after me asking if I'd gotten her text about the PTA meeting next week, where they'd be discussing new safety protocols, and I just kept walking. Friday afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and for a second I thought it might be corporate calling to threaten me. But the voice on the other end was calm and professional, introducing himself as Adrian Porter from Juvenile Services. He said he was the diversion officer assigned to Avery's case, and he needed me to bring her in for an appointment this afternoon if possible, or Monday at the latest. I said we could come today, and he gave me the address, saying to ask for him at the front desk. The Juvenile Services office was in a newer building near downtown, the kind of place that tried to look friendly with bright paint and artwork on the walls, but still felt institutional. Adrian met us in the lobby, and he was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with an easy smile that seemed genuine. He shook Avery's hand first, getting down to her level, and asked her about the book she was carrying. She relaxed a little, talking about her favorite series, and I realized he'd done that on purpose, putting her at ease before the serious stuff. He led us back to a small office with a round table instead of a desk, and offered Avery juice and crackers from a basket on the counter. Once we were settled, he explained the diversion process in detail, speaking directly to Avery for most of it instead of just talking to me over her head like she wasn't there. He said she'd have 12 weeks of check-ins with him every other week where they'd talk about what happened and what she was learning. She'd also have therapy sessions with a counselor who specialized in helping kids understand and control their impulses, teaching better ways to handle big feelings like the anger she felt at the party. He explained she'd need to do 20 hours of community service, something appropriate for her age like helping at a food bank or community center, not anything dangerous or too hard. The biggest part was something called restorative justice, where she'd have to meet with the people affected by her actions and hear how it impacted them and talk about how to make things right. He said the restitution amount, the money we'd have to pay back, would be figured out based on our income and what was actually reasonable, not just whatever number the restaurant claimed. Adrian was clear that this was a way better outcome than going through the regular court system, but he also made sure Avery understood it wasn't getting off easy. She'd have to do real work to understand why what she did was wrong, even though her reasons for being angry were valid, and she'd have to face the people she hurt and take responsibility for that. He said a lot of kids who go through the program come out of it with better skills for handling conflict and stronger sense of how their actions affect others. I asked about the $35,000 in damages, and he said that was a civil matter separate from the diversion program, meaning the restaurant could still sue us for that money, even if Avery completed diversion successfully. But he also said that completing the program and showing she'd learned from her mistake and made amends would probably help our case if it did go to court, because it would show she wasn't just some violent kid, but someone who made a bad choice and worked hard to make it right. He gave us paperwork to fill out and scheduled our first official check-in for next week, and when we left, I felt something I hadn't felt since this whole thing started, which was hope that maybe we could actually get through this. Ayanna called that evening while I was making dinner, and I almost dropped the pot of pasta when I saw her name on my phone. She said she'd contacted Chuck E. Cheese corporate and flagged the child labor issue, and apparently this wasn't the first complaint they'd gotten about the premium package system. Other locations had received complaints from parents about kids being required to work during parties, though none of those situations had blown up publicly like ours did with the property damage and the viral parent chat screenshots. Corporate was nervous, she said. Really nervous about bad press and the possibility of a state labor board investigation, or even federal attention if the story got picked up by news outlets. They were willing to negotiate instead of just suing us into bankruptcy, but they were also angry about the damages and especially about the injured employee with the broken nose. She said the regional manager, a guy named Peter Zhang, wanted to meet with me directly to discuss a settlement that would avoid both a lawsuit against me and a formal investigation into their labor practices. I asked if this was a trap, if they were trying to get me to sign away rights or admit fault for everything, and she laughed and said probably yes to both. That's why she was going to attend the meeting with me as a consultant, even though she wasn't officially my lawyer, because her firm's reputation alone would keep them honest. She said Peter would know that if he tried anything shady, she could make his life very difficult with regulatory complaints and media attention, so he'd be motivated to play fair. We scheduled the meeting for next Wednesday at a coffee shop near my work, neutral territory where neither side had home field advantage. I spend Saturday and Sunday at my kitchen table with everything spread out in front of me, organizing it into folders the way Ayanna suggested. The photos of Avery's scraped knuckles go in one folder. The urgent care paperwork with the doctor's notes about injuries consistent with pulling apart machinery goes in another. I screenshot every message from the parent chat, especially the ones where Mrs. Wellington and her friends pile on about disturbed children, and I print them out because Ayanna said physical copies matter in meetings. My conversation notes with Brett's grandmother fill 3 handwritten pages, her exact words about him crying himself to sleep, about the bathroom cleaning, about how excited he'd been for his first Chuck E. Cheese experience. I write my own timeline of events too, starting from when Avery asked to go to the party, ending with us leaving the police station. Every detail I can remember about what happened and when. By Sunday night, my fingers ache from writing and my printer is out of ink, but I have everything organized in a way that looks almost professional, like I know what I'm doing even though I'm terrified. Monday morning, I drop Avery at Mira Medina's office for her first therapy session, and the receptionist tells me it'll be about 45 minutes. I sit in the waiting room with magazines I flip through without reading a single word, my mind spinning through everything Avery might be saying in that room. Is she telling Mira I'm a bad mom who works too much? Is she explaining that I let her go to a party where kids were treated like servants? Is Mira writing notes about neglect or poor supervision? About a mother who didn't protect her daughter from exploitation? The clock on the wall ticks so loud I can hear it over the soft music playing from hidden speakers. A mom with a teenager comes in for the next appointment, and I wonder what their story is, what brought them here, whether they're dealing with something as big and scary as property damage and lawsuits. When the door finally opens and Avery walks out, I search her face for signs of trauma or anger, or anything that would tell me this was a disaster, but she just looks calm, maybe a little tired. Mira appears behind her and asks if I can come in for a few minutes. We sit in her office while Avery waits outside with a coloring book, and Mira explains in this steady, reassuring voice that Avery has a very strong sense of fairness and justice, which developmentally normal for her age. Kids around 8 start really understanding rules and right and wrong, and they can get intensely upset when they see unfairness, especially toward people they care about. The problem comes when they don't have the tools yet to handle those big feelings, and in Avery's case, she felt completely powerless to help Brett, so the feelings exploded into action. Mira says we'll be working on other ways to channel those feelings, ways to speak up about injustice that don't involve destruction or violence, and she seems genuinely optimistic that Avery can learn these skills. She tells me Avery isn't showing signs of deeper behavioral problems. No history of violence toward other kids or animals. No pattern of destructive behavior. Good relationships with peers generally. This looks like a kid who saw something terrible happening to her friend and didn't have the emotional tools to handle the rage that created. I hold it together until I get to the parking lot. Then I sit in my car and cry for 10 minutes straight, relief flooding through me so hard my hands shake on the steering wheel. Wednesday morning, I meet Ayanna at the coffee shop 20 minutes early, my folder of documentation clutched against my chest like armor. She's already there when I arrive, laptop open, looking polished and professional in a way that makes me suddenly aware of my Target clearance rack blouse. Peter Zhang shows up exactly on time, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He shakes hands with Ayanna first, then me, and his grip is firm and cold. We sit at a table in the back corner and he opens his briefcase, pulling out spreadsheets and photos and repair estimates. He lays out the damages in careful detail, his voice steady and corporate. $28,000 for the animatronics, he says, sliding photos across the table showing Pasquale's disconnected head, Helen's destroyed guitar, Mr. Munch's shattered keyboard. $4,000 for the ticket blaster machine that Avery completely dismantled. $3,000 for other equipment damage, including the destroyed Chuck E's costume and damaged sound system. Plus lost revenue from closing early that day, and staying closed the next day for repairs, which brings the total to $35,000. He has documentation for everything, receipts and invoices and repair bills, all organized in plastic sleeves like evidence in a trial. Ayanna lets him finish his whole presentation without interrupting, just taking notes on her laptop. When he's done, she looks up and starts talking about the child labor concerns in this calm, measured way that somehow sounds more threatening than yelling. She mentions the discriminatory practices based on ability to pay, how kids from families who couldn't afford the premium package were required to work while wealthy kids played. She talks about multiple parents who are now willing to file complaints with the state labor board and the Attorney General's office. Parents who documented their children being required to clean bathrooms and serve food and pick up trash during what was supposed to be a party. She says her firm is considering whether this rises to the level of a class action case, whether there might be dozens or hundreds of families across multiple locations who experience the same exploitation. Peter's expression doesn't change, but I see his hand grip his pen tighter, the knuckles going white. He says the premium package is just a business model offering different service levels, no different from first class versus economy on an airplane. Airlines don't give everyone the same seat, restaurants have different menu prices, theme parks have express passes for people who pay more. The children at Chuck E. Cheese volunteered to help with small tasks, he says, and were compensated with tokens for their assistance. It's teaching responsibility and work ethic, not exploitation. His voice stays steady and corporate, but there's an edge underneath now, a defensiveness that wasn't there before. Ayanna asks if 7-year-olds can legally volunteer to clean bathrooms in a commercial establishment. She asks whether requiring work as a condition of receiving promised entertainment might constitute unpaid child labor under state law. She slides a printed summary of relevant labor statutes across the table, specific sections highlighted in yellow, and Peter barely glances at it before pushing it aside. The meeting goes in circles for the next hour. Peter keeps defending corporate policy, talking about business models and market segmentation and customer service tiers. Ayanna keeps pointing out legal problems, asking questions about liability and regulatory compliance, mentioning investigations and class actions. I sit there feeling useless, like a prop in a play I don't understand, watching these two professionals argue about my daughter and $35,000 in child labor laws. Peter says he needs to consult with corporate counsel. Ayanna says that's fine, we're in no rush. Peter suggests we reconvene next week and Ayanna agrees. And just like that, the meeting is over without anything actually being resolved. In the parking lot afterward, I tell Ayanna I feel like we accomplished nothing, like we just wasted an hour going in circles. But she seems satisfied, almost pleased. She explains that Peter now understands they can't just steamroll me with the damages lawsuit, can't just demand $35,000 and expect me to roll over. Corporate will have to weigh the cost of pursuing that money against the cost of a labor board investigation, potential fines, bad publicity, maybe even a class action lawsuit that could cost them millions. That math works in our favor, she says. They'll come back with a better offer because fighting us is more expensive than settling reasonably. I want to believe her, but all I can think about is that I still owe $35,000, and nothing we said today made that number any smaller. That night, I tuck Avery into bed and she stares at the ceiling for a long time before asking if she's going to jail. Her voice is small and scared, and I realize she's been carrying this fear for over a week without saying anything to me. I sit on the edge of her bed and take her hand, feeling how small it is in mine. I explain the diversion program in terms she can understand, telling her she'll have to work hard to make things better, that she'll meet with a counselor and do community service and face the people she hurt. But no, she's not going to jail. I promise her that I won't let anyone take her away from me, and she finally looks at me with those big eyes and asks if I'm sure. I tell her I'm sure, and she rolls over and falls asleep within minutes, like a weight has lifted. The next morning, the school principal calls my cell while I'm getting ready for my shift at the hospital. She says she needs to meet with me to discuss Avery's behavioral concerns and how they're affecting other students and families. Her voice is careful and professional, and I know this is going to be another battle. I schedule it for Friday morning, already feeling exhausted by the thought of another conversation, where I have to defend my daughter, while also acknowledging she did something terrible. I hang up and stare at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, noticing the dark circles under my eyes and the way my shoulders seem permanently hunched now. Friday morning, I walk into the principal's office and see Mrs. Wellington sitting in one of the chairs, along with two other parents I recognize from the premium package group at the party. My stomach drops because I realize immediately this isn't about Avery's education or her well-being. This is about them wanting her punished or removed from the school entirely. The principal looks uncomfortable, shifting papers on her desk and not quite meeting my eyes as she starts talking about maintaining a safe environment for all students. Mrs. Wellington sits with her arms crossed, her expression smug and satisfied like she's already won. I lower myself into the empty chair and force myself to stay calm, to listen and wait for my moment. The principal talks for a few minutes about the incident at the restaurant, about concerns from parents, about the school's responsibility to all families. Mrs. Wellington jumps in to add details about the violence, about the broken nose, about $35,000 in damages. The other two parents nod along but stay quiet, letting Mrs. Wellington do the talking. I let them go on for 5 minutes, watching the clock on the wall and counting my breaths. Then I interrupt and ask the principal directly if Avery has ever been violent at the school, ever threatened another student, ever done anything before this single incident that would show she's a danger to anyone. The principal pauses, glances at Mrs. Wellington, then admits that no, Avery's record is completely clean. She's generally well-liked by teachers and peers, gets good grades, participates in class, There's nothing in her school file that would indicate behavioral problems. Mrs. Wellington's face goes red, and she interrupts to say that one incident of extreme violence is enough to show a pattern, that we can't wait for Avery to hurt someone at the school before taking action. I lose my patience and turn to face her directly, asking if she knew the basic package kids were being required to work during her son's party last month. She goes even redder and says that's not relevant to this discussion, that we're here to talk about Avery's behavior. I press harder, asking if she knew 7-year-olds were cleaning bathrooms and serving pizza while her son and his friends played. She stammers something about teaching responsibility, and the principal holds up her hand. The principal's voice is firmer now as she says that while the incident at the restaurant was serious, it happened off school grounds and doesn't reflect Avery's behavior at the school. There's no basis for disciplinary action here because Avery hasn't violated any school policies or rules. Mrs. Wellington looks like she wants to argue, but the principal continues, saying that the school can't punish students for things that happen outside of school unless there's a direct threat to the school safety, which there isn't in this case. The other two parents look relieved to have an excuse to drop this, like they were dragged here by Mrs. Wellington and are glad to have a way out. Mrs. Wellington stands up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and walks out without another word. I thank the principal and leave, my hands shaking so hard I have to grip my keys tight to keep them from rattling. I sit in my car in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I trust myself to drive, my heart pounding and my breath coming fast. My phone buzzes with a text from a parent I barely know, someone whose daughter is in Avery's class. She says she's pulling her kids out of any activities organized by Mrs. Wellington's PTA committee, that what happened at that party was wrong and she's glad someone finally said it. I stare at the message for a long time, feeling something loosen in my chest. The next day, Peter calls me directly on my cell, and I'm surprised because all our communication has gone through Ayanna up to this point. He says he has a settlement offer that he thinks will work for everyone. The company will drop any criminal complaint and reduce the damages claim to $10,000 if I sign an agreement not to discuss the labor practices publicly or cooperate with any investigation. His voice is smooth and reasonable, like he's offering me a gift instead of trying to silence me. I tell him I need to talk to my lawyer and hang up before he can push harder. My hands are shaking again as I dial Ayanna's number. She picks up on the second ring and I explain what just happened. She's quiet for a moment and then she's furious, her voice sharp as she says Peter was trying to get me to agree without legal advice. The NDA clause is exactly what she warned me about, she says. If I sign that, I'm protecting a system that exploits kids. The next Brett will have to clean bathrooms because I stayed quiet. She asks if I understand what I'd be agreeing to, and I say yes, I think I do. We hang up, and I sit with that for a long time, weighing $10,000 I can maybe afford to pay over several years, against letting this practice continue at other locations, other parties, other kids. I think about Brett crying himself to sleep, feeling ashamed that he wasn't good enough for the robot show. I think about Avery's face when she described kids working while others played, the way her voice shook with anger at the unfairness of it. I know what I have to do, even though it scares me more than the lawsuit, more than the debt, more than any of this. I call Peter back the next morning before my hospital shift starts, my phone pressed against my ear while I stand in my kitchen staring at the coffee maker. I tell him I won't sign the NDA and I'll cooperate fully with any investigation into the labor practices at his locations. His voice goes cold and professional as he warns me that corporate will pursue the full $35,000 in damages, and I'll likely end up in court facing additional legal fees. I say okay, and my voice comes out steadier than I feel, and he hangs up without saying goodbye. My hands shake as I set the phone down, and I have to sit at the kitchen table for 5 minutes before I trust myself to drive to work. Ayanna calls me that afternoon during my lunch break and says she's already moving forward, her voice sharp with energy. Within 3 days, she organizes a meeting with the state labor board and gets Brett's grandmother to agree to provide a formal statement about what happened at the party. 4 other parents whose kids worked at different parties also agree to talk, including the mom who messaged me after the school meeting. The teenage employee who got hurt, the one in the torn costume, agrees to give a statement about the pressure he faced from parents to exclude basic package kids from character interactions. Ayanna emails me copies of everything, and I read through the statements on my phone between patient rounds, my chest tight with anger at how many kids were affected. 2 weeks after the incident, a certified letter arrives at my apartment requiring a signature. I sign for it standing in my doorway in my scrubs, just home from a double shift, and the mail carrier gives me a sympathetic look like she knows what's inside. I open it in my car before driving to pick up Avery from after-school care, and the official lawsuit paperwork makes my vision blur. Chuck E. Cheese Corporate is filing a civil suit for $35,000 in damages plus court costs and legal fees. I stare at the numbers feeling sick, my stomach twisting as I realize I just bet my entire financial future on the hope that their labor practices are illegal enough to actually matter to someone. My hospital shifts turn into a blur of work and worry over the next few weeks. I pick up extra weekend hours at the clinic, even though it means barely seeing Avery except for rushed breakfasts and exhausted bedtimes. My supervisor notices the strain when she finds me staring blankly at a supply closet inventory sheet for 10 minutes, and she quietly arranges for me to get some shifts in the better-paying surgical unit starting next month. I tear up in the break room when she tells me, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness from someone who barely knows my situation. Avery's therapy sessions with Mira continue every Wednesday afternoon, and I sit in the waiting room doing paperwork from the hospital while they talk. Mira pulls me in after the fourth session to report good progress. Avery is learning to identify the physical signs of big emotions before they become too strong to control, and she's practicing ways to speak up about unfairness that don't involve destroying property or hurting people. She's also processing real guilt about breaking that teenage employee's nose, which Mira says is healthy and shows empathy. I drive home from therapy feeling cautiously hopeful that maybe my daughter isn't permanently damaged by whatever made her snap that day. Adrian, the diversion officer, calls me on a Thursday evening while I'm making dinner and suggests something called a restorative justice circle. He explains it would include Avery, me, the teenage employee from Chuck E. Cheese, and potentially Brett and his grandmother if they're willing. The goal is for everyone to share how they were affected by what happened and what they need to feel like things are made right, and for Avery to take real responsibility for her actions. I'm immediately nervous about putting my 8-year-old daughter in a room with someone she hurt, someone whose nose she broke. Adrian assures me the circle will be carefully led by a trained person, and Avery can stop participating at any time if it becomes too much for her. We schedule it for the following week at the community center, and I spend the next several days helping Avery prepare what she wants to say. We practice at the kitchen table after dinner, me playing different people so she can rehearse her apology and explanation. She writes notes on index cards, but Adrian says she won't be allowed to read from them. She has to speak from her heart. The restorative circle happens on a Tuesday afternoon in a small conference room at the community center, with bland beige walls and uncomfortable plastic chairs arranged in a circle. It's harder than I expected from the moment we walk in and I see everyone's faces. The teenage employee is there and the facilitator introduces him as Kyle. He's 19, younger than I thought, with a fading bruise under his eye and a slight crook to his nose that wasn't there before. He talks about his broken nose and missing 2 weeks of work without pay, but also about feeling constant pressure from parents at parties to treat kids differently based on what their families paid. His voice cracks when he describes being told by managers that premium package parents should get priority attention because they spent more money. Brett's grandmother cries when it's her turn to speak, her hands trembling as she describes her grandson's excitement about his first Chuck E. Cheese experience turning into shame and confusion. Brett sits small in his chair next to her, his feet not quite touching the floor, and when the facilitator asks if he wants to say anything, he just says quietly that he wanted to see the robots sing. Avery listens to all of it with tears streaming down her face, not making any sound but visibly shaking. When it's her turn, she apologizes directly to Kyle for hurting him and says she knows breaking his nose was wrong no matter how angry she felt. She apologizes to Brett for ruining his party and making everything scary and awful when he just wanted to have fun. She explains that she got so angry seeing the unfairness, seeing Brett work so hard and then get excluded from the show, that she couldn't think straight anymore. She says she knows now that anger isn't an excuse for violence and destruction, that there were other ways she could have tried to help. Kyle surprises everyone by saying he understands why she snapped, that he's been angry about the system too, but felt trapped because he needed the job. He says he's sorry he was part of treating kids that way, and he's already quit working there. Brett's grandmother reaches over and squeezes Avery's hand, and Avery looks up at her with wide eyes like she can't believe she's being forgiven. Adrian shifts forward in his chair and asks what each person needs to feel like things are made right. Kyle speaks first, his voice steady now, saying he just wants his medical bills covered and a real apology, and he looks at Avery when he says both of those things are already done. Brett's grandmother wipes her eyes and says she wants the labor practices to stop, so no other kid has to clean bathrooms at a birthday party, and Avery promises right there that she'll do her community service hours at the food bank, where Brett's grandmother volunteers every Saturday. Adrian writes everything down and explains that this agreement becomes part of Avery's diversion program, binding her to follow through, and everyone in the circle signs a paper saying they participated and what they agreed to. The whole thing takes 2 hours, and I'm exhausted when we leave, but Avery seems lighter somehow, like a weight lifted off her shoulders now that she's faced the people she hurt and heard them say they understand. A week passes with me working extra shifts and watching my phone, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Peter Jang calls on a Tuesday afternoon while I'm folding laundry, and his tone is different this time, less aggressive and more businesslike. He explains that corporate decided to stop the premium package model completely after the labor board opened a formal investigation into their practices at multiple locations. They're willing to settle the damages for $8,000 and drop the lawsuit entirely if I agree to a limited NDA that only covers corporate trade secrets and internal business information, not the labor practices themselves. I tell him I need Ayana to review it before I sign anything, and he emails the contract over within an hour. Ayana calls me that evening after reading through the whole thing and says it's legitimate, that the NDA is narrow enough that I can still talk about what happened to Brett and the other kids if anyone asks. She sounds satisfied when she tells me this is a good outcome, that corporate is scared enough of the investigation to settle cheap. I accept the settlement the next day with a payment plan of $200 per month for 3 years. It's going to be tight, really tight, but manageable if I keep picking up those weekend clinic shifts. I sit at my kitchen table signing the papers, and I know this isn't perfect justice, because I'm still paying for damages my daughter caused, but the system that made kids clean toilets for tokens is being taken apart, and that matters more than the money. 3 months slide by faster than I expect. Avery finishes her community service hours at the food bank, 20 hours of sorting donations and helping pack food boxes alongside Brett's grandmother, who treats her kindly and never mentions the incident. Her diversion program wraps up successfully with Mira's final report saying Avery has learned better ways to handle anger and advocate for fairness. The lawsuit gets officially settled and closed. Kyle's medical bills are paid in full, and Chuck E. Cheese corporate issues new policies banning any work requirements for guests and requiring equal access to all entertainment, regardless of what package parents bought. Mrs. Wellington quietly steps back from her PTA leadership role after other parents start questioning her judgment about the party situation, and the school parent chat becomes noticeably less toxic without her constant drama. Brett's grandmother calls me one Saturday and tells me Brett is doing better and wants to invite Avery to his next birthday party at the park. Not Chuck E. Cheese and I almost cry hearing the warmth in her voice. I take Avery out for ice cream to celebrate finishing her program, and she asks me if standing up for what's right always has to be this hard. I tell her honestly that yes, usually it is, but that doesn't mean we stop doing it. We're not where we were before this happened because we're tighter on money, more careful about social situations, more aware of how fast people judge. But we're also stronger in ways I didn't expect. And Avery's sense of justice is still there, just aimed at helping at the food bank instead of destroying robots. Some days are still hard, but we're building something better from the mess, one small choice at a time.